Action, guys.
Action. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Virtual Pub episode 10. Yay, 10 episodes now. Today, we've got a very special guest. I'll introduce him in a moment. My name is Boaz Fischer, and we have...
Sean of Fear.
Good morning. And our special guest is Kurt Mueffelmann from the CEO of Nucleus Cyber, which is great. Really appreciate you being with us on this morning. But before I get to you, I'm just going to get Sean to say what is the virtual pub? Why did we start with the virtual pub?
Well, also as an alcohol favors, the virtual pub basically was designed because of the COVID and the lack of the capability to meet people in face-to-face. So we decided to have a nice, easy chat, ongoing chat for where thought leaders, special matter experts, and industry influencers can meet and discuss the subject and the topic of the insider risk, the human risk element.
Great. So today's topic is all about secure collaboration. And is that possible? So today we have, again, our special guest, who is the CEO of Nucleus Cyber, Kurt Mueffelmann. I hope I pronounced the name properly there, Kurt.
Yeah, perfect, perfect.
Perfect. Tell me a little bit about you and your background, and then also the background of Nucleus Cyber.
Well, yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having us. Nucleus Cyber is very happy to participate in this. We think that insider threat is one of the growing areas of cybersecurity challenges out there today. But first of all, I'm here over in the States, so we are presidentless at the time, and I was up until 3 o'clock this morning watching the returns come in, and we're still waiting on a president. So more importantly, though, since it's only Wednesday evening here in Boston, it's 5:45 in the evening. I want to just let you know that while we're waiting, I'm properly prepared for our next president, whoever that may be. So we have some U.S. homemade vodka. Yeah, we have a nice 2016 Napa Valley Sterling Vineyards, which is a beautiful Cabernet. I think there's about that much left in the bottle, and I think I drank that between 10 and 11 o'clock last night when I was waiting for some announcements to come in. But lastly, if we don't have it announced tonight, I'm going to break out the Maker's Mark, which is really the American bourbon whiskey. So that's the high stuff. So we'll see where that goes. So it's a lot of fun here in the States right now.
Yes.
So look at where my background has been. I've been a CEO in technology for the last 25 years. I've run half a dozen companies that have gone everything from accounting software to electronic forms to electronic payments, a couple of turns in there. And the last 3 companies I've run have been in the cybersecurity space. They've gone everything from, we initially started out, and the actual legacy of Nucleus Cyber was for compliance around public-facing websites. And we developed a product that was allowing developers to ensure that their websites were accessible. And so they were able to actually make it viable for people with visual impairments to access the website. We started looking at a little bit deeper and realized that, yes, as important that is, the privacy issues when people were going online and doing electronic shopping and putting their personal information in the websites became paramount to protecting who they were. And so we realized we had a very intelligent rules engine. And this is back in 2007, 2008. And so we created an intelligent rules engine that allowed us to identify things such as personally identifiable information, personal health information. We have a very flexible rules engine that allows us to do things such as custom search. So we can do things such as looking for legal documents, intellectual property, anything to that nature. And so when we started looking at that, it became interesting because, I called it the gun. The gun was facing public-facing websites, but that was at the time of SharePoint, SharePoint 2007, or MOS. I think that was what it was called back at that time.
Correct.
And so I went back and I said, well, guys, if we can point it at the public-facing websites, why don't we look at it and how do we focus it on the insider? right? How do we protect, internal documents? How do I identify that? And Gartner actually called that area file analysis. And at the time, the prior company to Nucleus Cyber was called High Software. We were one of the top file analysis companies out there. And so we could go in and look at things such as file shares, which, are the death of all companies because they really don't want to know what's in their file shares because they're afraid what's in there. SharePoint sites, and now into the cloud. So we could go out and identify on any of those platforms what information was out there that may be exposed from things such as, Australian Privacy Protection Act, California Consumer, GDPR, which is the big buzzword out there today, personal health information, what have you. And we had quite a few organizations, and actually your, over in Canberra, the Ministry of Health is using Nucleus Cyber right now for identifying documents as well as areas within the organization that may contain personal health information that is paramount to citizens of Australia. So we saw that, and it was really cool. And so we said, okay, what's the next natural progression? Next natural progression is that, hey, if we have an identity of what this information is, how do we actually prevent people from either accessing it if they don't have information or access to it? Because at the time, SharePoint was a complete disaster with permissions, which is very difficult. Or more importantly, how do you prevent the oversharing of that information, right? And that led into Nucleus Cyber, where we're able to identify the actual information. We're able to tag it from a metadata standpoint. Now it's a little bit more technical, but we're able to put a tag on it to say, hey, this document contains something that's either important or may provide some level of compliance. But then more importantly, how do we proactively prevent that information from being accessed by people that don't have it and then overshared with people that may be outside the organization, trading partners, third parties, and what have you. And as we gotten into the cloud and things such as Office 365, Teams, Dropbox, Yammer, OneDrive, and what have you, we really looked at that and said, boy, we're really actually securing collaboration today. And that's kind of how we came up with that kind of talking point around this oxymoron of, can you really securely collaborate? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
We've proven it across, our hundreds of customers that are out there that range everything from a very small 3-person private equity firm to some of the largest defense industries and defense agencies in the world today.
Great, thanks, Kurt. So what I'll do is I'll get Sean to set the scene because we like to set a bit of a story. And so Sean, take it away.
Yeah. So thanks, Kurt. It's great introduction. Look, you mentioned the word collaboration a few times. So if I look at the Sean Ophir dictionary for the collaboration word, I reckon it will be the way people share information, trade, share resources, time, and efforts in order to get into a mutual goal. And collaboration became, I guess, the must-have need that grew all of a sudden due to the forced COVID situation and the swift transition to work from home. So the nice-to-have collaboration tools that you mentioned became critical for many organizations in order to function and operate. And while organizations invested fortune in building data protection capabilities by the years or over the years, the new situation caught many of them unprepared, and they had to adjust quite fast. So the question that we will be asking today is that situation made organization compromise their data protection policies, or does the freedom and flexibility come on the expense of data and IP security and protection? Can we keep them both? So this is the interesting question I would like to see if NC can address, or how to set the mindset.
Yeah.
But before we do that, Sean, what I want to do is talk by the very nature that information, you don't produce information by itself. You don't produce information just for yourself. Information is there to share, to collaborate, to produce an outcome. So, Kurt, bringing what Sean and myself have said, what are the challenges today when it comes to collaboration and security in today's digital age?
Yeah, I think that the main issue is, I mean, Sean mentioned COVID. It was even before COVID, right? We were talking about this last time I was with my development team down in Melbourne, and we were visiting some key customers across Europe, across the Middle East, and Australia. So back in December of 2019, I did an around the world trip to visit our key customers. And it was funny that we started talking a little bit about, the way we worked really has changed. Even prior to COVID, I think I was on 37 different networks. I was in 14 hotels over a 2.5-week period, using things such as different machines. I was accessing on a laptop. I borrowed someone's laptop to access some information. I was using my mobile device. I grabbed one of my kids' iPads because I had a movie on it, but I needed to access information there. Right. So how we accessed information and how that information was being shared, whether it was internally with my staff, whether it was with attorneys or accountants or bookkeepers around sensitive information around our financials, or even looking at things such as proposals with customers that were out there that have very sensitive needs. Right, how we access that information with the devices that I'm accessing it on, the world has changed dramatically, even before COVID. Right, before you sat at your laptop or your desktop, you came in at 9, you logged on, and then at 5 o'clock you logged off. Well, there's no, in today's global economy, it's a 24/7 environment. So the way we work has changed. How we access and share that data has changed, and I'll touch on that in a moment. Collaboration across, this cross-channel, which is, are you working on something that's on a on something that is maybe a file share or SharePoint or up in the cloud, right? We didn't have that 5-10 years ago, right? Everything was on a server that you accessed. It was, CD //, whether it was an old COBOL command or clicking on a Word doc that was just kept inside. And so you found that traditional things such as, traditional DLP was really focused on this data at rest, that it was protecting and encrypting data. So if someone, grabbed the file, they couldn't take it away from them, right? But now the way we work is this data is in transit. And not only is it transit, it's going across, different people internally, externally, professionals, consultants, out to other people, out to consumers, customers, vendors, and what have you. And it's just the way we work. And so it becomes a challenge. But now on top of that, look at how we communicate today. And one of the things I always talk about is look at how people share information, okay? You share information through your email, right? That's predominantly how people share or have historically shared information, right? So you have the body of an email, or you have an attachment or a link to an email, right? So that's one way. Now you have file shares, which again, people have servers under their desks that have things such as personally identifiable information. We're working with some of the largest research organizations in the world that are on secure, trusted information or trusted secure servers that no one else can access, but yet people have to share that information. Look at things like SharePoint, which again, 2007, 2010, 2013, 2016, 2019, all those different versions that are out there, jumping up to Office 365, Teams, and what have you, right? At the end of the day, these are all trying to accomplish the same thing. They're trying to share documents or files or information, right? They're all kind of collaborating back and forth. But unfortunately, they all have different back-end security aspects behind them, right? You protect your email one way, you protect your SharePoint another way. Your cloud environment of Office 365 is completely different. Teams right now, we're seeing Teams as the next big wave out there, particularly due to COVID and sharing, but they all have different aspects of security around them, but it's really trying to tie that together. What Nucleus is trying to do is taking that single set of security for your in-transit or your information protection and going across all the different collaboration channels that you have out there, keeping it simple where the end user doesn't have to download anything onto their device, right? And so there's nothing that you have to put down onto your endpoint. So it's very simple to manage. There's no end user training because it's really invisible to the end user. They're only accessing the files that they have access to in a dynamic nature, right? You're looking at the way they dynamically access those files. And so the way we've changed that really prevents that malicious or accidental insider threat, which is very costly to organizations today. And I would argue that it's actually should be higher up in the priority list than whether 250,000 credit card data gets breached. I mean, your credit card data is already breached whether you like it or not. But if a intellectual property or a a financial statement of a pre-released announcement comes out, that's going to cost billions of dollars in economic impact.
Kurt, excellent, thanks. Look, you mentioned a word which Sean and myself talk a great deal, which is insider risk. And when I go to your website, and on the many occasions we've talked about, that's a language that you use a lot. Now in Australia, it's not heavily publicized. Insider risk tends to look at people and look from a malicious point of view. Obviously, that is not the case. How does Nucleus Cyber look at insider risk? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, insider risk, it could be anything, right? It could be something such as, corporate espionage, where you have a sales rep come in and they're going to go over to a competitor. So they're going to take a customer list, or they're going to take, proposals or project plans and take them over, right? So who should have access to that? There's a big contentious issue between Google and I believe it was Uber a couple of months ago, because one person actually went into a secure file, they grabbed all the information and they went over to the competitor, right? So that's malicious access or malicious intent, and that's tied back to the person being an inside. But we also look at insider risk being call it that oops moment, where someone by accident puts a file into the wrong folder, or they turn on and make guest access into a team site that has sensitive information in there. And so now all of a sudden you have these challenges, right? All of that is coming from the inside. And we look at that and we actually delineate that differently from what I would call the outside attacks. The outside attacks are things such as nation state, or some sort of economic impact of stealing personal information, or making a malicious attack and setting up malware, or looking at ways of coming in and working their way through the network. That's the outside in. Here we're talking about people that are authorized, that have access inside the information, as opposed to outside in. So it's really looking at ways of preventing that malicious corporate espionage from happening. But really, at the end of the day, I call it the oh shit moment, where someone goes, oh, I just sent an email to the wrong person, right? How many times have you heard someone say, I sent an email to you by mistake, can you delete it? Or on a confidential call, Boaz, I really shouldn't share this with you because it's company confidential, but don't tell anybody, right? And so it's that accidental, or the, it's not going to do us any harm type things for that. And then there's also technology that's allowing this. You find that, through things like search, we have a customer, actually one of the airlines in Australia, they turned on one of the search technologies that comes across with some of the Microsoft technologies, and all of a sudden all their HR documents were searchable. And so we were able to actually find things such as the CEO offer letter. We also found all the employees that were placed on probation for certain things that they did. That was searchable and discoverable, and now accessed by anyone across the entire company, just because it was like we did it by mistake, right? No malicious intent, right? I think at the end of the day, most people are good, right? It's just that oops moment. Or you send an email to Chris and it should have gone to Christine, right? Well, Christine's maybe has a little bit more malicious intent and it went to the wrong person by mistake, right? So that's where we look at insider threat being a little bit more involved in trying to cover that data in transit aspect.
Yeah, Sean and myself often have a discussion where we're talking about that oops moment quite a bit, but that gets by far more exacerbated when stress comes into the equation, specifically now. So what I was going to ask Sean a question, how do you see from being that sort of accidental risk that usually takes place, and that takes place, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure. Look, Good. You mentioned the word DLP, and Boaz, we heard it from multiple chief security officers in the recent times. That when they say DLP, they mentioned that this is one of the biggest rip-off in the industry, which is a big lie. And just because of that term, data leakage prevention, when you talk about data leakage prevention, but basically you refer to a rear mirror that, oops, I hit something, and then you look at the mirror and you see that you hit a kangaroo. But what if you could actually prevent it by not hitting the kangaroo? So it doesn't really prevent, it's more used for remediation and then also reporting to the authorities, but it doesn't really stop the problem. It just report about a problem, or it just alarm. When we talk, and what Boaz and I, we talk more about, when we talk about insider risk, we talk more about the unintentional. And unintentional and stress, as you mentioned, Boaz, it put people in a very weird situation when, in one hand, they need to follow the policies of the corporate. And on the other hand, they need to perform. Now, when they're pushed from both sides, it puts them under a lot of stress, and stress leads to mistakes. So stress also leads to policy violations, but not from a malicious intent, from unintentional, or I just wanted to be good, so I took the file, or I was on holiday and it was the date of the payroll, so I asked my assistant to send me the file to my Dropbox, and I'm sitting in a coffee shop in Thailand, and I will do everything from there because we have time constraints. And the moment you share information and breach the policy of the organization, you take the information outside, not from a malicious intent, it doesn't actually make any difference. The policy is broken and the data is out there. People want to finish work by the weekend and they can't take the data outside, so they ask their friend who has access to send them the file or allow them to access the file from home. So with that, how the remote work from home actually added to that challenge of sharing information, but keep the security policies at the same time.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that again, the way you work has changed, right? And so maybe you have access to a file when you're behind your desk, or you're within, the corporate network, or in a certain geographical area. But once you change that way that attribute is being hit, then you don't have access to that information anymore, right? And so that becomes a real-time challenge that organizations are facing. And so we look at it from an attribute-based way, and that you look at really two things, with two key drivers, right? It's the attributes around the content, and then the attributes around the user. And so we can actually, my team actually uses the example that, I'm the worst at it, because, when I'm on an airplane, or when I used to be on an airplane, I used to open up PowerPoints and change them all the time. And then, when I land, all the PowerPoints have changed, right? And so that's actually, not inside a threat, but it actually has disrupted the company. And so my VP of marketing, as well as my chief product officer, put in a rule just to kind of tease me, and they got it down so granular that they said anytime I was in an airplane, I could not access and change PowerPoints. And so that actually, is a good way of demonstrating just the power of creating that real-time attribute-based access controls around dynamically accessing files. Last time I was actually in Canberra, I met with one of the ministries, and they mentioned that it was a privacy violation to have their ministry access Australian citizenship information outside of the borders of Australia. Okay, so how do you stop that? Someone gets on a plane, they go up to Singapore for a meeting, they have an email, it's a spreadsheet, they click on it, and this was actually a real life use case. They clicked on it, and there was some immigration issues that had personally identifiable information. That was a reportable breach. But now, if you take things such as this real-time attribute-based access, we can actually, as Nucleus, understand that, hey, the user who's accessing this information is not within the confines of Australia anymore. And so based upon that attribute, he's not allowed, or they're not allowed to open up that information that may contain personally identifiable information. So we're taking the user attributes, saying that, yes, you're in a certain location, or you're on a certain device, or it's a certain time of day, and then mapping that dynamically and proactively stopping it, based upon the attributes that yes, this file contains sensitive information that would cause a breach. So it's that dynamic nature that really is important today in the way that people work, whether you're from home or on the beaches in Thailand or wherever, of what you can access and can't access.
Yeah. Let's take.
Emphasize them. So basically, we can, according to your description, we can actually move from the traditional DLP description, which doesn't really work, to we can describe NC as more user DLP, which is data leakage prevention from a user side. So it doesn't matter. We don't chase the data. We basically look at the user and the permission and the attribute, and we say, look, if the guy is not, if that person not authorized to access the data on that specific or under these circumstances, the data is not available for him. So we don't need to capture and quarantine the data. We just make the sheet blank.
That's exactly right. And so what we actually do is we actually augment the user experience. And so if they're accessing the information, say through Microsoft Teams or Office 365, if the user doesn't have access to that document, we don't even present it to them. So we're modifying their user experience through the natural, their familiar UI of 365 or Teams. We make that file completely disappear. So you can't really breach or access what you can't see. So you're not clicking on a file and saying access denied. You just don't see that file whatsoever. We make that completely disappear.
Now, another interesting thing that you mentioned on our last conversation, and this is something that every organization will face, and everybody will say we don't have a solution for that, is a company can spend millions or hundreds of thousands on very expensive DLPs, but when you buy a $50 anti-DLP device that can actually take a picture of a document and share it on WhatsApp or any other collaboration, free collaboration tools, you mentioned something about if a user open a document, he's authorized and privileged to open a document, and that document leaked because someone took a picture, something happened, that can still be tracked. So we have a unique identifier when someone open and share the documents. If I say, look, guys, I'm in a meeting, and I say, guys, I know that you don't have access to that document, but let me show you something that you don't have access to, and I share it on my GoToMeeting or Teams, and someone is taking a snapshot. So you mentioned something about that one can be tracked, and if there is an investigation, if that document leaked somewhere, even to the dark web, and it found it, we can track the source who actually shared and violated that policy.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways that we look at that, right? And so say a person has access to a document, maybe they're in their office, and let's use a financial statement through an Excel spreadsheet. If they're in their office, they have full access to that Excel spreadsheet, they're doing what they need to do. Now they actually change their location, or they change their security level, or open it from another device or a certain period of time. What Nucleus can do is determine the user attribute to say, hey, they're not in their typical environment. And so we can put this into what we call a secure web browser or a secure web viewer. And it's really, it's almost like an Adobe PDF, but it's actually in a web browser. Nothing gets dropped down onto the device itself. And so it becomes in this viewable mode. And so what we try to do, even extending beyond that, is we have this really neat feature called a dynamic watermark. And based upon the time and the user attribute, it could be the user name, it could be their Active Directory or anything like that, we can lock that down and actually have that actually appear as part of the image. So it does two things. One, when a user opens it up in the secure web viewer and it pops up and it says Kurt Mueffelmann on it, I know, number one, that's a sensitive document. The company is telling me with that watermark, with my personal name on it, that is sensitive. Additionally, I'm going to be less apt to take a picture of it with my mobile device. So if it's a financial statement, for instance, am I going to take a picture of a financial statement with my mobile device that has my name on it and share it across people? Now it gets pushed back to me. So if I share it on WhatsApp, or if I share it on something else and my name's on it, it comes back to me. So it really deters the person's ability to really share that information that may be oversensitive or super confidential.
That's so.
I was going to ask you a question more from a context wide. So when organizations are looking for some form of data risk mitigation, are they looking to say, I need an outcome to prevent, to stop data walking out the door, or are they looking for a sort of compliance? Because compliance doesn't mean security. Compliance means that you've checked the boxes. How have you seen it from a sort of a global perspective?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, particularly now, because I think that, when the pandemic came up, everyone, jumped, we work very closely with Microsoft and across the Microsoft Teams environment. And so everyone said, oh, we need this solution where we could have telephony, but we also need to collaborate and share information. We need alternative ways to reach out to our customers. And so things like guest sharing. So IT, rushed to get it in. The business loves it, right? And now there's this natural push-pull conflict between IT compliance and the business to say, hey, where do we need to do to control this, right? You want to let that natural progression, feed itself and let that go ahead. But, again, from a governance standpoint, how do you make sure that, when you set up a team site, which has no underlying administrator, that you're setting up a team site that allows only people that have certain access to certain information? Or how do you set rules or what we call security scopes to make sure that when a team is set up, there's at least these core areas of compliance around that? When you provision a site, which creates an underlying SharePoint site behind it, which becomes an administrative and a cost factor to it, how do you keep that clean? How do you do things such as e-discovery for that, which gets into things such as private channels? How do you keep, we're working right now with a large insurance organization that has, multinational companies that they need to set these, information barriers or ethical divides between subsidiaries to keep the information separate. How do you set that up? So it's a really tough question that each company has to address separately, where generally we find the businesses say, yeah, let's go. We want to make it easier for people to do their work and do business. And then IT is like, whoa, 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 whoa. We got to slow down. We got to fill out this form. We have to wait 5 days before we authorize the creation of a new team site. I mean, we're working with organizations that, have 15, 20,000 team sites right now. That's a tough way to manage from a compliance standpoint, let alone understand the underlying aspects of what that information sharing, security aspect is.
Yeah, excellent. So Kurt, one more question, or maybe two more questions. What is the number one key takeaway that organizations can take away from viewing this session?
Yeah, I think it starts small, right? Everybody says security is really this large, confusing aspect, and they're almost inundated by it, right? They overthink it.
Correct.
Right? Start with something, right? Start with something that you can, hey, we want to protect HR documents, we want to protect some intellectual property, we want to, protect, as we provision teams, we want to give access, right? Think about what your use cases are, because when you look at, from a Nucleus perspective, we can deploy within 15 to 30 minutes. So it's a very rapid deployment. And that could be, across a file share, through Windows IIS. It could be through, your on-site SharePoint site, or through your own Azure environment. We want to make sure that the data stays sovereign to you as the organization. So it can be rapidly deployed. Secondly, again, as I said earlier, there is no deployment that has to come across to the end user. So creating these rules, one of the defense ministries that we have is probably our most complicated customer. They only have 9 underlying rules that are protecting, some significant troop movement, supply chain management, and overseas military theaters. So our rule sets are very, very easy to provide. And then when you look at costs, again, how much is it going to cost? Our product is, probably about a cup of coffee per user per month. We're between $2 and $3, per user per month on a licensing perspective. So is that worth it to, protect the information that's near and dear, and really, provides that economic, power or impact to your business? Absolutely. But you got to start small. You can't come in with this huge kind of grandiose scheme to say we got to protect all this. Boil it down, look at ways, and then you'll see it build out. And we've done that again with the hundreds of customers that we've had in the past, and even now, of how we build that. And we're getting that all the time from customers. Start slow, build it, easy to deploy, simple to use, and cost effective.
Excellent. Kurt, is there a question that we should have asked you but we haven't?
Let's see. I haven't looked at my phone, so I don't know if we've had any updates on the U.S. presidential election. So I think that's the good question.
Okay.
Big question right now. No, I think it's
Yes.
to me, I look at this almost as the next natural phase within DLP, right? Why haven't DLP projects been successful? Because they're very complicated to deploy. They focus a lot on the classification of the data, which gets down to things such as taxonomy and what's the underlying structure and everything behind that, which goes so many layers deep across not only an organization, but it goes across all the different departments within an organization. When you start to look at this data-centric approach to security, right? We can determine, all right, who in HR has created a document, let's lock that down, or let's make it, a different way to access it. We don't need to rely on that taxonomy, whether it's, classified or the taxonomy structure behind it. Again, that's very expensive, very costly, and it's that old legacy kind of frame of mind.
Correct.
So looking at it from a next phase standpoint, the data-centric approach of looking at the data and looking at it from the inside out, as opposed from, hey, let's look at accessing into an application, accessing into a file, a folder, accessing into a file, right? You're trying to protect that file, so start with the file of what the methodology is, and then go out. Don't start from the outside in.
Yeah, I mean, Sean and myself have this metaphor when we talk about DLP, which is the gun and firing a bullet. And a lot of the DLPs will try and catch the bullet as soon as it's been fired, which is too late. We've often talked about changing the behavior of the person so that they don't pull the trigger. But a lot of what you're saying is more about, well, let's not even put the bullets inside the gun. So even if they shoot something, nothing comes out. Sean, I want you to wrap up this conversation, and then I'll get back to you, Kurt, and say how we can get people to contact you. Sean, go ahead.
Yes, but we always say that security is all about people, not systems, not data. It's all about people. And as you mentioned, that metaphor, the bullet and the gun, you can have the best protections against bullets, but the actual problem is the one that pulled the trigger. So if you teach and deter and encourage people not to pull the trigger and prevent them from pulling the trigger, then you will not need to deal with the bullet. So, correct. And as you mentioned, Kurt, DLPs are quite traditional, and they deal very well with the symptoms and try to minimize the impact, but they don't solve the problem. And we buy a solution by its definition is something to solve a problem. And if you buy solutions that don't solve a problem, these are not really solutions. These are just waste of money and junk. So and we always say, if there is no access, there is no business. So people need to access to make business. At the same time, we need to make sure that people have. We encourage them to think outside the box, give them the freedom of creativity and freedom of work so they can be more productive, more happy. At the same time, we need to keep the data governance like if they were in their office. So being outside, working from home or from everywhere makes people happy, makes people more flexible, focus on the business, focus on the work and less on other distractions. At the same time, they need to be encouraged, deterred, and managed to make sure that data is being protected. DLP is dead, as we always said. User DLP, that's the new thing, because DLP is data leakage prevention. It's all about people that send the data outside. No, data doesn't leave the organization by itself. It doesn't have legs. So yeah, I think you said it well, Kurt.
Yeah, Kurt. So so those people who are watching it, how do they get in contact with you or get in contact with your organization? What's the best way?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways. So we work very closely, with organizations such as yourself, as channel partners and resellers and trusted advisors across a number of geographical areas. The easiest way is just to reach out to us through Nucleus Cyber. So it's nucleuscyber.com. Is the best way. There's a number of different ways that you can access, the number of videos about the product, about the challenges that organizations face, There's some great white papers and solution briefs that we have that range everything from, what's a data-centric approach to how do we integrate into, the Microsoft Office, suites of products, or even the Microsoft M3 and M5 security licenses that are out there today, which is a very big area for us. So, reaching out through our website's the best, or contact you guys directly, and then I'm sure we can work directly with, the various opportunities and, do discovery calls and see what the challenges may be.
Beautiful. Sean, any last words?
Yeah, that video, it was great, and that will be uploaded to the SABASAI channel so everybody can see it afterwards, and we'll have all the details there, and also the contact details there. And please use the comments and subscribe to the channel, and we'll be very happy to work together, Kurt.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And
thank you.
Now it's time. Time for a little bit of bourbon.
Cheers.
Cheers, gents.
Cheers.